So I had a player send me this VoD of King's Row, and on defense they play Zarya, on offense they play Orisa, and I decided that I'm going to focus on the Zarya first. So I'm going to make a video of Zarya, and then after that I'm going to flip it over to do another video of the Orisa gameplay. I'm going to use q.gg in order to review this VoD. Here we are 17 seconds into the video, and let's take a look. So I like that they're getting small charge in here, at least trying. I like that they backed up from the choke here. Some players don't recognize that they actually need to be back here by the statue. Their Reinhardt's here too, so that's another good sign. Alright. Alright, here's the first thing though. You don't want to bubble your Reinhardt at this moment. See, because you're not going to get any charge out of it. Everyone's behind a wall, and this Mei is not threatened at all. She's in her ice block. What you do is you wait for the Mei to come out of her ice block, or wait for everybody to be trying to save the Mei, but make sure that they're feeling pressured. So that's a wasted bubble right there. Alright, you would have had so much charge by now. The other thing is, you know, if you waited for the Mei to come out of ice block and bubbled your Reinhardt, that's a lot more shielding you would have to help get out of that situation. You ended up taking a fair amount of damage. You were fine, but if the enemy team was played that a little bit better, you might have died there, or you would have taken a fair amount of damage, a lot more than you did. All right, so I recognize that you want to get charge off your Reinhardt there, but let him get close to the Reaper. Essentially, allow the Reaper to feel pressured and then bubble the Reinhardt. When that Reaper recognizes that they have to be fighting for their life, or if they get tricked into thinking that maybe they'll get some good damage in, and you trick them into shooting your Reinhardt, that's good. You want him to be you want players to be committed to a particular action before you bubble someone. Now, I can say that sometimes it's not always good to be bubbling your Reinhardt before a Reaper uses their shift. Like, if the Reinhardt looks like he's actually low on health, or, you know what I mean? Like, because that Reaper goes into your entire team, and your entire team would probably just pressure the Reaper out, and at which point the Reaper will just shift back to their team. So you have to wonder whether or not that's a useful bubble. Simply because the Reaper can make the choice to not shoot your Reinhardt. They can just turn and shoot somebody else, and your team will be pressuring them enough where they'll probably just run away rather quickly. So you could just choose to save that bubble entirely and wait for your Reinhardt to come back to the front line, at which point you can do something different with it, something better with it. So the Reaper's on your team, and you're pushing up to the front here, but the thing is, your team is naturally going to want to pull back and deal with the Reaper. So you being up here isolates you from your team. And right now, you take a bunch of damage because of that. See that? And nobody's there to really help you. So you absolutely should die here. Your Reinhardt goes ham, and that's what saves you, I guess. But I'm glad that you go behind this pillar, by the way, that you recognize where cover is and how to use it. I'm going to move forward a bit here. So for here, you need to rotate back towards the point and not be on the left side of the statue right now. So basically, the enemy team should push into this, and if they push in here, you don't want your team or yourself to be the left side of the statue. You want to be on point, back towards where your Reinhardt's coming back. Your Reinhardt will be respawning, coming back to the point, and so you want to be over towards your Reinhardt because you'll group up faster that way, number one. Number two, if you play around the statue, that gives you a little bit more space and a little bit better cover to get away from the enemy. If you back up towards your spawn, you're always going to be in a better position, generally, than if you are segregated off to the side of the point that is on the enemy's side of things. So that's a general rule that will oftentimes be good to follow. But yeah, your goal right now is to simply buy time so that your Reinhardt can get back and your team can regroup and be strong again before the enemy pushes in. That's a good bubble on the Reaper because number one, Reaper's up here at the choke and he's putting damage in the other team, and he's a key threat, so that lets him do that longer. And number two, in a way, he's stalling them there because they are taking a ton of damage and he's threatening, and that bubble just lets him do that longer. That helps you stall. Now, there's a concept that I'd like to go over called what I like to call a wall of damage. And although this is not like a huge amount of damage from your entire team, it kind of serves as a way to hold everyone back, because even though your Reaper is not a shield, his damage is threatening enough where it kind of pressures the enemy to stay in one place for a little bit longer. And generally you need more damage than just one Reaper shooting in a general direction at a front line. For instance, if you had more members of your team up here kind of pressuring slightly, like, I'm not going to suggest that's good right now, but I'm trying to illustrate the concept. Say your Reinhardt was there and you had everybody shooting into this choke point, then you would have a much easier time holding these people there, because you almost have like a curtain of damage, just keeping everybody pinned down. But for a brief moment, your Reaper kind of serves to do that. Yeah, I wouldn't be over here so much. Not yet. Like, I can understand wanting to kind of push people from the left-hand side, but when you're on defense, the more often that you're on this left-hand side, the less often that you're going to be successful, because this statue kind of separates you from your team. Like, it can briefly give you cover, but I would be thinking, if you're over at that statue, I would be thinking about how you can get back to your team, because there is actually a large amount of distance from one side of that statue to the other. If the enemy team pressures in, I suppose we could take a look at this from a top-down view. Okay, so here we have King's Row, and the pink is the enemy team and their controlled space. Blue is your team, your controlled space, and yellow is where you're currently at. So this is a hypothetical situation. Say the enemy team pushes into the front line, pushes into right about here, and your team will then have to back up to the point and be right about here in the front of this triangle. This apex here will be your Reinhardt. What will allow so this positioning, or the controlled space of these two teams, puts you at a disadvantage, because look at the distance from where you are. Like, this statue is actually kind of huge, and where you're at, you're separated completely from your team. So the enemy team has a couple of options here. They can push in on you, everybody just run around the statue and kill you, or if they advance here, they can let's see, they can push up to be right about here, right? And then at that point, you are completely cut off from the team. So if they push in and you try to get back, you can just be annihilated as you travel from where you're at currently, back in this direction. You'll have to run through them to get to your team. So that's why you don't generally want to be on this side of the statue when the enemy team starts pushing in. Okay, so here we are at a minute and 32 seconds into the video, and you're playing this corner, front and center. Both teams have a Mei, and when you have a Mei on either team, you have to consider some things. First of all, if the Mei is not in your group, you may not want to trust her, which means being up here would cause you to be walled off by the enemy Mei if she performs her job correctly, and you might die, and nobody would be able to save you. So you're able to luckily get out of that, but you could have died right there. Especially if that maid had performed her task a little better. Now, if you do have a Mei in your group and you can trust your own Mei, and there's a Mei on either team, but you can trust yours, and she's in a good position to help you out, then you can stand up in the choke a little better, because the Mei that walls second oftentimes wins. So what could happen here is, if your Mei does a good job, their Mei will try to wall you off, but your Mei's kind of there to help you out, and she can wall whoever comes through, like segregate them off as well, and then she can push in and help you. That's how that interaction can go better. But because I'm just going to assume that you can't trust this Mei on your team as much as you'd like, and that you are lucky you got out of that situation. Now we're at 2 minutes and 35 seconds into the video, and I just want you to take a look at this bubble usage here. Alright, that Reinhardt is not in position to be damaged in the slightest. He's not close enough to walk in front of them to gain charge. You do nothing with that bubble by doing that. That was useless. So I watched this part again, and I realized that there was something I was missing out on. And that's simply that your Reinhardt has his ult. So what's going on here is your Reinhardt's looking to shatter, and you two are not on the same page. He's thinking, all right, I want the enemy team to come through, and then I'm going to shatter them all. You're thinking, okay, he's looking for shatter. Why isn't he up here at the corner? I'm trying to enable him so that he can do something about this. Why is he being indecisive or not getting in there? Maybe he needs help to get into position. So you're not on the same page. He's thinking, let them walk through, then shatter. You're thinking, let's walk through the front line and shatter the whole team. And that's why that's a useless bubble. Meaning you need to communicate about what the intentions are here. And you could have gotten a lot more value out of this, of course. But don't just preemptively try to bubble someone to force them into action. Talk about what's going on, and allow them to make their own choice about how they're doing things. And maybe your Reinhardt could have used this bubble, but still communicate what your intentions are here ahead of time. A few seconds later, the Mei ults. So you bubble. What you could be doing here right now is right-click jumping, because you're on the edge of this ult. So if you can use a bit of charge, bubble yourself, and do your right-click jump to propel yourself even further while trying to get out of this Mei ult. Because I think you could have got out of there. Yeah, you take a bit of damage while doing so, but first of all, you're bubbled for a second, and that could help you to not take as much damage, and while still being able to propel yourself. I think you could have gotten out of this. It takes a little bit of getting used to, like to remember that you can do that and feel safe enough to, when you're somewhat lower on health, to do it. But your only chance of living here was that. Okay, so we're at 3 minutes and 36 seconds into the video here, and we're going to take a look at this next interaction. Notice we have grab, so we're looking to grab. First of all, your Reinhardt is low on health, but he has his shield up. He can be healed. He might not die here, and because you are looking to grab, I would really, really want to save your bubble if you can. Like, this is a hard choice here, but I might have tried to see how this would play out before bubbling him, just because your grab is going to have a lot more opportunity to be successful if you can bubble your Ryan so he can swing into it. And notice that he has 38% health charge or alt charge here, so he could definitely benefit from being able to swing freely into your grab. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is you really need to communicate that you're going to ult. So spam your alt line if you're not in voice, or hopefully you are in voice. You can just talk to people and let them know what you're trying to do. Because watch what happens. Perfect grab, and it gets walled. So maybe your Mei didn't know what was going on here. She could have used her wall to maybe wall people off or whatever, but you lose all the power of what you're trying to do because she screws up. Or I'm sorry, let's put it this way, because she didn't know what you were gonna do. Um, and then watch what happens next. You're taking a bunch of damage here. Your Reinhardt could have, if you had bubbled your Reinhardt while you, so he could swing into the grab and be safe, and like if all of this had gone well, you might have not be taking as much damage at the moment. And so the next thing that happens here is, because you are taking a bunch of damage, you back up from the choke. But the problem is, you should not be backing up to the left. You should be backing up behind your Reinhardt and hopefully towards the bookstore. You taking this wide angle. Like, if you watch this whole, like, I'll just play it and we'll see what happens here. But all of this is a series of small choices you made that causes you to die in a moment. And look how so you have a Moira ulting in order to save you right now, and to do some, she'd rather be pressuring the people in front of you on the payload and maybe getting more use out of your grab. But because you're walking away from the payload, she has to turn her heels to do only one thing, which is help you out. All these ults are being invested. And then you have the tire, which, you're already walking back to the left and you're getting spammed, but this tire blows you back even further. The Reinhardt knows he can get you, and you die. So the first thing is, you need to communicate your ults. The second thing is, you need to know where you ought to be retreating back to. Instead of retreating back to the left, you should be retreating back to the bookstore. And if you like, we can take a look at this from a top-down view again. Okay, so here's our top-down view of where we are currently at. And what I want to point out about this is, whenever you can, like if you have a map where there's a strong 90-degree turn or a strong angle, you want to have your team retreat behind that angle when you get pressed. So here we have this corner of the bookstore. And if you look at it, the enemy's line of sight, we'll go with black here actually. The enemy's line of sight is blocked by the corner here. They can't shoot you around there. And if you think about the front line being like a Reinhardt, and the enemy team following that Reinhardt, so he'll be at the apex here. He'll be at the very front and center. So if the enemy team moves forward to this corner of the bookstore and the Reinhardt is right here instead, if you'll notice the way that people often rotate, or how teams actually get in position to do more damage, generally they rotate around the front of their main tank. So the main tank will take this position on the corner here, hopefully, or near the corner, and the enemy team will rotate behind him, which means, if you pay attention to what that actually looks like, so here's the Reinhardt here, and the enemy team gets up behind him. If they want to pressure into your team, generally they'll rotate around him like this. It actually looks like a swinging door. So here's the hinges where the Rhine is standing, and the door swings out behind it, meaning there's a lot more distance that needs to be traveled for the back line and the DPS and everybody else who's rotating around this central point. Meaning, if you go around, so if your team is retreating behind them, the enemy team is not going, even if the Reinhardt gets up here and gets in position, the enemy team is not going to be all shooting straight through the Reinhardt to attack you. They actually have to rotate behind their Reinhardt to have a line of sight onto you. So it takes them longer to get into position to be shooting from where they'd like to. And you can continuously abuse this, especially on King's Row here. So here, if the enemy team gets there, we'll erase part of this, but the rest still kind of works. Say they push here, your team can be pushing back further over there. So the next place you could be going is here. See? Doing the same thing, following the same pattern. And you break line of sight again, make them press in there, and you just continuously back up there and continuously use these 90-degree angles to break line of sight, force their main tank to get up to a corner, force their team to have to rotate behind that main tank to actually get line of sight to shoot at you. And this whole time you're buying time while your team has a chance to pressure them as they push in. So like the other thing we can talk about is when say so when the enemy Reinhardt does get up to a corner, the main tank does get up to a corner. So say they do get up here, and their Reinhardt is right there. All right. In order for the enemy team to start shooting at you, it takes time for them to get in position. But that whole entire time, the Reinhardt has to shield in order for them to do that. So they can't shoot at you. He's using his shielding resources in front of your team. Your team can pressure his shield for free and burn it up, which is very important in this meta. Because we don't have a lot of shields to work with. Reinhardt has the most shielding at 1600 health, but the longer you're pressuring it, especially for your Reinhardt has his shield up, yeah, but the enemy team isn't in position to be pressuring it yet, while your team is in position to be pressuring the enemy Reinhardt. So you get shield advantage, you can destroy them eventually. So as long as you're backing up and recognize this and playing your corners well, you're going to win that shield war. And the enemy team, yeah, they're pressuring forward here and maybe the cart's moving, but if you're playing this well, you destroy the shield, you push in, you destroy the team, you take that space back, and the cart actually moves backwards, and you can just play this L-shaped, or I guess it's actually Z-shaped corners as much as you want, over and over again until the enemy team actually pushes through and wins. But yeah, the idea is give up space in order to maintain your advantage and destroy the resources, then take it back. This video is already 20 minutes long, and I think we've gone over a lot of topics and we've seen some repetition here, and that's enough content to be teaching one person in one day. So I guess we'll end it here, and then I'll go back over the key themes again. So the key points of this video are to get more value out of your bubbles and have better tank line positioning, or utilize better tank line positioning. So for getting more value out of your bubbles, you're going to want to bubble when the enemy feels pressured or threatened. Part of that comes down to making sure they've used their cooldowns, so that, like for a Reaper or a Mei or any other character that has a get out of jail free card, you're going to want to make sure they use that first. And then when your team is on them and pressing them and they feel that they actually need to escape and they need to protect themselves, that's the best time to bubble. So that's one way to get more value. Another way to get more value out of your bubbles is to bubble your team to enable them, and to do this better, use comms to help coordinate what you're doing. That way you don't just kind of bubble with a hope and a prayer that somebody does something with it. For your tank line positioning, know where you should be holding and why. Like a corner somewhere, someplace where you can use the environment to hide behind when your shields go down. Especially like if you're having an Orisa instead of a Reinhardt, that's important. But you need to be knowing where you need to be backing up to, and then understand controlled space and when you are being separated from your team. So this has to do with your positioning versus your Reinhardt's positioning and the rest of your team. Understand when the enemy's pushing in and something's happening where they have a way to split you off due to your controlled space being split up by them. And that's everything, or that's the major points I want to talk to you about. At least focus on those key things, and you should be climbing. All right, and then finally, the content I use in this video for the maps, I use Stat Banana for reviewing the actual video. Before I made a video about it, I went through and I took notes using that program you saw when I was hitting play, when you were watching the gameplay. That's q.gg if you're interested in using that. And that concludes this video. If you would like anything else that's similar to this, or if you like this video, you can head on over to the subreddit of Overwatch Educators. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can find other educational content produced by me. And then there's other players that are at least masters ranked in Overwatch that have also produced content, and it'll be continue to be that way. So, thank you for everything. I hope that you have a great day.